Hi guys, and welcome to this video. I hope you're all doing well. So today's case, guys, is quite a difficult one, and when I was researching this case, my legs actually started shaking and I nearly started crying. I just want to put a disclaimer out that there is a high level of violence in this case, and so if you are very sensitive to that, obviously you're welcome to, of course, not watch this video. So to start with this case, guys, it starts off with a gentleman named Mikhail Khachaturyan. Mikhail Khachaturyan was actually born in Azerbaijan and was ethnically Armenian, and because of the kind of war situation that was going on between Azerbaijan and Armenia, this was around 1988, his family decided to relocate to Russia. So that included himself, his mother, his sister and his younger nephew, and they all relocated to Russia. So Mikhail relocates to Russia with his family. Now we jump ahead quite a few years and he meets a young lady called Aurelia Dunduk, and Aurelia Dunduk became his wife. At the time when they met, Mikhail was actually 35 and Aurelia was just 17 years old, which already you can kind of see that Mikhail is kind of a predator. So he meets Aurelia, and Aurelia is originally from Moldova, and her family had also actually relocated to Russia too. So they were both kind of like immigrants, and they met each other. So what happened is Aurelia and Mikhail started dating, and after a few months Aurelia got really sick of Mikhail because already he was perpetrating a higher level of violence towards her. He was very abusive, and so after a few months she was like, I'm done with this, and she moved outside of the city where they were to a different area with friends to kind of like escape him, and that was only after a few months. So at this stage this could have been a situation where after 2 months this was done and that would have been the end of this situation, but that is not what happened. So what happens is Mikhail keeps pestering Aurelia, and we need to bear in mind again, guys, that Aurelia is only 17 and Mikhail is 35, right? So he's pressuring Aurelia to get back with him, even though, you know, she's not on this, but he keeps pressuring her and pressuring her. In the end, she attends a New Year's Eve party that he's organised. So there's loads of people at this party. It's coming to the end of the night, everyone's going home, whatever, and Aurelia's still there, and he ends up locking Aurelia in his house and won't let her leave, basically. Due to obviously a level of violence, abuse, coercion, coercive control, Aurelia ends up back with Mikhail, and they end up in a relationship. And a year later, so by this time actually it's 1996, and a year later in 1997 their first child is born, called Sergei, who was a little boy. So basically the situation doesn't get any better because Mikhail is still very heavily violent towards Aurelia, and he's also violent towards Sergei, the little boy, as well. And at this time, Mikhail's family is actually living with them as well. So his mother's still living there, his sister, and also his younger nephew as well. And then a few years later, the first sister, Christina, is born, right? This is about 2 years after Sergei was born. So anyway, as the kids are growing up, there's this high level of violence going on, and then another 2 little girls are born called Maria and Angelina. By the time Sergei gets to the age of around 16, this is in 2013, Mikhail is like, I've had enough of you, you need to leave the house now. And I think, to be honest, at that point Sergei probably felt, even though it wasn't a good situation, a sense of probably relief, because he's now escaped this high level of physical and verbal abuse from his father. So Mikhail has now evicted Sergei at the age of 16 and chucked him out on the street. So for a few weeks Sergei was living homeless as a 16-year-old in Russia, and luckily one of his friends took him in, and to this day he still lives with his friend now. I think they must be like best friends or something, and thank God that he had that friend. That must be a very good friend. That's all I'm going to say about that. So thank God his friend was there. So he went to live with him, And so now you've got Mikhail in the house with his other family members. Aurelia's still there, Christina, Angelina and Maria, and they're still living there, and he's now perpetrating all this violence onto the girls and Aurelia, and his mother, his sister and his nephew never interject in this violence. They just sit back and watch him do this to these women. In 2014, the family decided to take a holiday to Israel. Now, I forgot to mention, guys, that Mikhail is still supposedly highly religious, and the family are Christian Orthodox, okay? So Sergei wants to take this religious kind of trip to Israel and takes the girls, and I'm not sure if the mother goes with them, but they go on this trip to Israel in 2014. And this is when the situation of sexual abuse starts, and he decides to sleep with one of his daughters, and he starts telling her that it is a sin to have sex outside of marriage, but because that's his child, and it's not an outsider, it's okay for her to sleep with him. And then after this holiday, the father just becomes again more and more abusive. The violence is off the Richter scale. We now reach 2015, and the father one day gets out a gun and holds it to the mother's head and is like, I want you to leave the property, I'm sick of you, and by the time I get back I want you to be gone. And the mother is so terrified that she packs all her stuff up and just leaves her children there. And I'm kind of like, why has she left her girls in that situation? But again, she was also very vulnerable. So Aurelia has packed up and now left the apartment, and the girls are now left in the hands of their father and his other family members. And so basically, after the mother's left, the father now starts perpetrating the sexual abuse onto the other two sisters. So he's now sexually abusing all three sisters. His mother, his sister, his nephew, again, are just sitting back, allowing him to carry out these disgusting acts on these three little girls. And this goes on for years and years and years, basically. Now, in this time frame, guys, the sisters developed these kind of defense mechanisms where whenever they would go to school or college, or they'd be out the house, they'd be dressed completely normally, and they would communicate normally with everyone and had friends and all of this kind of thing. So when you would see them outside the house, you would never think that this is actually what's going on. And it's just like all this abuse, they kept it to themselves and never ever revealed it to anyone outside the household. And they had to cook, clean, do everything, and the father was still abusing them physically, mentally, sexually, everything, right? So basically, it got to a point where the father now was becoming so controlling and paranoid and crazy that he started to progressively stop them from going out of the property. So now he didn't want them to go to college anymore or anything, and he wanted them basically to just be, you know, like housebound, and that's it. And what actually ended up happening, so this has gone on now approximately from 2014 to, or even before that actually, to around the time of 2018, okay? At this stage in 2018, the girls are 19, 18 and 17, because they're all born 1 year apart from each other. So what happens is one of the girls, so the eldest one, Christina, she's 19, she's actually got asthma. And so, you know, asthma attacks are induced in different ways. They can be induced in a stress-related situation. They can be induced through exercise. There's different ways that asthma attacks occur. And I know myself because I'm actually asthmatic. So what happened is the father, he had like a pepper spray, right? And he decided to spray it all over Christina's face. Now, because she's asthmatic, the smell of this spray and everything actually started to trigger a really severe asthma attack. And I think sometimes people who don't understand asthma or aren't asthmatic don't really understand how it works, and people think, oh, asthma is when you're just a bit breathless, whereas in actual fact, having an asthma attack means you cannot breathe, as in your lungs are shutting down. So it's literally a situation where Christina could have died. Like, the attack she had was really, really severe. And her other two sisters discovered this. Like, I think they were in another room when he sprayed this on Christina, and the other two sisters, Maria and Angela, walked in and realised what had happened and realised the state their older sister was in, and that it was such a severe asthma attack. And this is a point where things started to change, because obviously they'd endured, such a high level of violence, but now they're realising that their older sister literally was at a point where she could have died. And so in their mind, that's when something started to change, and they were like, no, we're not doing this anymore, we're not tolerating this. So what happened is the other two sisters, while Christina was, sitting in a chair, and then she'd kind of dozed off to sleep after the asthma attack, the other two sisters that were 18 and 17, so Maria and Angelina, decided that they're going to murder their father, because they're like, we can't allow this to happen anymore after what's happened to Christina. So Christina didn't know that the other two sisters were corroborating to murder the father, right? So what they decide to do is they decide to get like a kitchen knife and I think a hammer and basically kill him. They stab the father, they hit him with a hammer, and then Christina wakes up, right, and realises what's going on. And then the father starts to chase one of them. They're in this kind of Soviet apartment block, and the father starts to chase one of them to attack one of the girls. And then they all like pounce on him, and one of them stabs him with the kitchen knife in his heart. And because it's directly in his heart, it literally just kills him straight away, because it's in the heart. It's not like it's hit an artery or somewhere else, and he just dies. Now some people might say, okay, why did the girls just endure this level of violence for years? Why did the mother endure this level of violence for years and years and years? And it's important to understand, guys, that this case took place in Russia, and the Prime Minister there is Vladimir Putin, and he's been in power for a long time. I'm sure a lot of you have heard of him and what he does. And he introduced a law in Russia where domestic violence was decriminalised, so it was actually legal to beat women, basically, right? And because of this law, that means that so many women, thousands of women actually, were unable to seek help when they were beaten by their partners or fathers or brothers or whatever. And because of this decriminalisation, guys, of domestic violence in Russia, it makes it very difficult to assist victims of domestic violence, because there are very few charities and organisations set up to help these victims, because the government, as in Vladimir Putin, make it very difficult for people to try and help women in these situations. And generally men are often the breadwinners in these families, and women are homemakers or housewives with kids, and so they've got no money to even be able to get out of this situation with their kids, and no support system. Imagine, guys, living in a country where it is legal to beat women, right? Anyway, so what happened is, about a day after this happened, the police turned up and they arrested the three girls, right? And the other three members, guys, let's not forget that you still got Mikhail's mum in the house, the sister and the nephew, yeah? And they're just all chilling there. They don't arrest any of them. They don't even assume that they would have, done this to Mikhail. It's definitely these poor three young girls that have done it, right? So they arrest the three girls. And when they arrest the three girls, they've got also like stab wounds, like knife cuts on them. And what the girls decided is, because domestic violence is decriminalised and that will not work in their favour, in their defence, they cut themselves with the knife to kind of try and show, okay, this was in self-defence, even though it was self-defence anyway, but to try and prove, because they knew they're going to be investigated and tried for murder, that, okay, he's also attacked us with the knife. So they've got some kind of evidence that they've also been attacked, basically, by their father. In 2018, you've got the three sisters that are 19, 18 and 17, so we've got a minor involved in this, yeah, that are now being tried for murder, okay? And in any other country, a lot of people would have looked at this case and seen, right, this is a situation of physical sexual assault which took place on minors, by the way, and that would have been quashed relatively quickly and whatever. But because this is Russia and it's legal to beat women, and apparently a man, you know, committing sexual assault on young girls, his young daughters, was apparently not viewed as shocking in Russia by the criminal prosecutors, these girls ended up standing trial for the murder of their father. And in the meantime, you've got the nephew and the sister speaking out and saying how amazing Mikhail was, what a lovely, kind, nice person he was, what a good father he was, right? Which is actually unbelievable, considering all of them actually witnessed all of this as well. But yeah, so now the girls have had to stand trial. They've also gone some psychiatric evaluations, been checked in regards to their sexual health and what's gone on there. And it was proven that the father had sexually abused them, because he had actually done this, which is what the girls had said, but their word wasn't taken seriously. So they had to undergo all these medical examinations. And it was proven that they were acting in self-defense. Their father had done this to them and blah, blah, blah. But they were still put on tag, and they were under house arrest in their house, basically. And in the meantime, the nephew was very active with the news and the press, saying that the girls murdered his uncle because they wanted to take his inheritance, because apparently financially he was quite comfortable, and that's why they murdered him, which is clearly not the case. But this is what the nephew was saying in the press at the time, and backing his uncle up, saying what an amazing man he was and all this kind of crap, basically. That's what happened at that time. And so now the girls are on house arrest, and they're still, you know, being investigated for the murder of their father. Now, there was a lot of conflict between the prosecutors on this case, where some were saying, no, we shouldn't be trying these girls for murder, it should be a self-defense situation, we need to look at this case differently. And other prosecutors who were very archaic and, you know, I don't even know what the word is, disgusting, wanted to say that no, we need to try them for murder, even though one of them was 17 and not even an adult. We need to try them for murder and blah blah. So all this back and forth was going on for a long time between all of these prosecutors over the years. So we got to 2022 now, sorry guys, we got to 2022 now, and it's been said that the girl should be convicted of his murder without considering all this domestic violence and everything else that's going on, right? And this caused outrage in Russia, where so many people were protesting. There was 370,000 people that signed a petition to support these girls. There were like fundraisers that were set up to financially help them. And a lot of people came out and spoke up in regards to this case and said that the law in regards to domestic assault and domestic violence, it needs to be changed now, because this is unacceptable. And so in 2022, after the case was supposedly, you know, came to a head, the girls were convicted of murder, they were put on house arrest, because there was so much back and forth, they were still put on house arrest, whatever, with tag, and the father was considered the innocent one, even though he'd done all of this, right? What happened is, luckily the girls' lawyers managed to get the case reopened. And sometimes, guys, what happens, it doesn't happen all the time, but even when the perpetrator is deceased, so they've died, what happens is a case that's called a posthumous case reopens. What happens, guys, in some criminal cases, so where the perpetrator of the criminal act is already dead, they've already deceased, but you've got the victim speaking out, and it's a very complex case. Sometimes the case will be reopened as a posthumous case, and a posthumous case is essentially where the perpetrator is already deceased, but in order to absolve the victims and, you know, see whether the victims were actually accurate in what they were saying and absolve them from any crimes, they have to open a posthumous case, so where they're actually reviewing the actions of the deceased perpetrator to see if they're going to actually incriminate the perpetrator legally, even though they're deceased, so that they can absolve the defendants, the victims basically, right? In this situation, the girls' lawyers managed to get a posthumous case reopened, right? And now we've got to 2023, so this case has been going on for a number of years now. So it was confirmed in the posthumous case that their father was actually the criminal. He was the one that was at fault here, right? And he was convicted of, like, you know, sexual abuse, domestic assault, and all of these other things, right? And the girls were considered absolved, so that they were acting in in defense, in self-defense against their father. However, because it's still a murder, it's still considered that they still need to be tried, even though it's now considered as an act of self-defense. And at the point we're at today, so it's apparent that the father's been now convicted, even though he's deceased, and the girls acted in self-defense, so it's not like a first-degree murder case, but the case is still ongoing to set out the conviction of the girls. And it said that potentially they still could get 20 years for murder, which is absolutely ridiculous. And apparently at this time they're still under house arrest, so they're not in prison, but they are under house arrest in regards to this case. And actually, in support of the girls, there are friends and other relatives from the mother's side, I think, that came and spoke up in support of the girls and said that there were some odd things that they'd seen previously. They didn't know everything that was going on, but there were odd things that they'd seen. So they were actually witnesses that spoke up in court in support of the girls. But for the Russian government, the Russian court system, this was not apparently enough to fully absolve the girls of this situation. And that was the case, guys, of the Khachaturyan sisters. Now, I just want to say, guys, this is unbelievable, because again, if this is a case that happened in the UK or somewhere like that, there is no way that these girls would be standing trial like this. There is no way that this could happen, okay? And I mean, the things that go on in Russia, because Vladimir Putin is such a disgusting person, considering what he's done to Ukraine and how he controls Russia as well, it doesn't surprise me from that setting. But the fact that these poor girls have to endure this after all the level of violence and sexual abuse and everything they've gone through, and their mother's now, I think, in her early 40s, so she's actually a similar age to me. I'm 41, and she has to now also live this process where her daughters, you know, they've managed to get this man out their life, and the mother and the children, they're now reliving this situation where they are accused of a criminal act when their father is the criminal in this. I think that a country that doesn't protect women from being beaten, wow, I don't know what era that country or that government are living in, but it's not 2024. It's a whole nother situation. But it's unbelievable what these girls have had to endure, and the fact that they're still, you know, so strong and are able to even speak out about what their father did, and have to sit there and justify to, you know, prosecutors and police why they did this. Like, why wouldn't you do this if someone was doing this to you? Do you know what I mean? And so, yeah, guys, this is why I felt it was important to cover this case, because more awareness needs to be raised for this case for these young girls so they can get justice. And if I have another update coming up, you know, in this year or next year, I will try to keep you guys updated, because I want to find out the outcome of this case, because these girls, they need to get justice. Please feel free, as always, guys, to leave your comments down below. You can leave me comments for case suggestions, or for different criminal cases, or for different cults as well that you'd like me to research and do videos on. And I really hope that those girls are doing better than they were before, and my prayers are with them. And I will see you very, very soon, of course, guys, for another video.